Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Okay, cool. So welcome to this last session of the day. My name is Patrick Sard. I'm a solutions architect working for AWS for a bit more than 6 years now. I'm also part of the machine learning and artificial intelligence technical community at AWS. And as such, I got the opportunity to work with a number of customers on machine learning topics, and in particular, lately, generative AI, which is a very hot topic, as you all know. So today, I'll get the chance to take you through one of our last services, Amazon Q, and in particular, Amazon Q Business. We'll first talk about the reason we're here, what's actually the opportunity behind this. We'll discuss about the different challenges that our customers, you, and our partners are meeting with generative AI. We'll also present, of course, Amazon Q, discuss a little bit about its features and show you in particular what it looks like and how you can use it for your in your daily challenges and use cases. So imagine if you are, for instance, a marketing manager and you need to launch a new product, you need to decide which channel could be most effective, which type of marketing campaign you're gonna lay out to launch that new product, and you need a couple of points and to look into various sources of data to make those decisions. Likewise, imagine you're a sales manager joining a new team, following a new customer that you inherit from one of your colleagues, and you need to sift through tons of documents to find out, okay, who the customer is, what is the current context, what sort of projects are ongoing, and you have that customer meeting to prepare for, and you need to sift through all those documents, account plans, meeting notes, emails, etc. Likewise, if you are a developer, a researcher, an engineer, a product manager, someone responsible for administrative tasks, there are a lot of things that you need to do on a daily basis that require examination of a lot of data, parsing of information, things that could benefit from productivity improvements. A couple of months ago, McKinsey came out with an estimate around the productivity gain that generative AI solutions could bring to employees at large in general. And they estimated that about 25% of the time they spent on their daily tasks could be saved. So imagine on a daily basis, every day, saving up to 2 hours of your time. What you could do with those 2 extra hours. And that's really also the feedback that we got from our customers about solutions, how they were using and trying to implement generative AI solutions, that they were facing issues, for instance, with accuracy. Okay, large language models are great, but they are not necessarily excelling in sipping through or leveraging all the data that they have within the enterprise. Likewise, those models can provoke hallucinations, invent data truth that don't exist, and as such, it's difficult to overcome those challenges. Okay, you can try retrieval augmented generation, RAG, to compensate for those lacks of knowledge. You can try fine-tuning, but those are tasks that take time. Likewise, well, your administrators, your security advisors are probably worried that using generative AI solutions could lead to actually leaking data or circumventing the permissions that they have put in place within your environment to protect confidential information that should not be made or shared with everyone. And last but not least, the administrators, the IT teams, they want something that makes their life easier. They don't want to have to go through all the complexities and to to craft all the building blocks, the components of a generative AI solutions from scratch, all together, every time there is a new project leveraging those technologies. So because of those challenges, that's why we came up with Amazon Q. So to improve and help our customers improve the productivity of their employees, and in particular, Q Business. So Q comes in different flavors. Our focus today is going to be on Q Business, the first on the left, but it's also there to help developers, builders on AWS. It's been trained on a lot of knowledge accumulated over almost 20 years of experience with our different customers at AWS to expedite mundane questions about how to do one or the other thing on AWS, how to implement one or the other service. And it's also present in a number of other capabilities that we provide in business intelligence with Amazon QuickSight, in call center support with Amazon Connect, and it's going to be made available also for the supply chain and logistics teams. So, as I mentioned, our focus today is going to be on Amazon Q Business in particular, and I'm going to take through its major features. So there are two experiences with Amazon Q Business. The first one is the end user's experience, and that's the people who are going to interact to actually leverage the expert assistant. So they're going to interact with it using a conversational style, like you would use a normal chatbot, essentially. But the idea is to use that interaction to actually sift through knowledge bases, corpus of data that belong to your enterprise. Those end users will also have the ability to upload directly content for the assistant to actually investigate, analyze the data that they're passing through some documents. Maybe you want to compare documents between them, two different versions of a contract, for instance, or things like that. Something else they'll be able to do is also have that assistant take some actions on their behalf. So, for instance, having that assistant plug onto your CRM system, your ticketing system, so that it can create, for instance, an opportunity in your CRM system, log in a ticket, so that something happens based on the conversation you had with it. And of course, last but not least, the objective is to generate content. So if you need, for instance, to summarize a long document, if you need to analyze tons of data and come up with some insight out of it, that's what it's gonna excel at. And then you have the second side of the coin, and that's the admin's experience. And of course, because it's a fully managed solution, it helps administrators deploy it more effectively. So it comes up with a number of capabilities that makes their life easier. One of them is the pre-built connectors that it provides to access different systems within your enterprise, so that you can plug, as I mentioned, your CRM system, your ticketing system, and other knowledge bases that you may want to leverage as well. It's also going to help them to maintain the security controls they have already put in place to make sure that the expert assistant is actually not used to circumvent the permissions that are already there. So make sure that it's not a system that's going to be used to leak information out of your enterprise data, but simply to help employees become more productive with it. And last but not least, it will also allow them to define some guardrails to make sure that the assistant does not operate beyond the scope that you define for it from the very beginning. And we'll see how this works in a moment. So a conversational experience, that's what you get. There is a pre-built web experience that you can easily experiment with. It's going to provide answers to your questions based on the knowledge bases that you plug it to. It will also cite its sources, so that's very important because the assistant needs to build trust, and the way to build trust is to allow you to do some fact checking, so providing answers, but also providing the source where it actually found the information. And this will maintain, of course, a conversation history of the interactions that we have with it, so that you can come back in time should you need to. Of course, you also have the ability, if your administrators allow it, to upload documents. As I mentioned, for instance, you have 2 versions of a contract, or you have a very long document that you want to analyze. So to help you accelerate that task, you can simply just, through the interface, upload the document and ask questions to the assistant about it. It supports a number of document formats already: PDF, Word, and PowerPoint presentations, for instance, CSV files, and text. Well, more will come, no doubt. The ability to also execute a task on your behalf. I mentioned it, so in this case, well, you can simply ask the assistant, okay, based on the conversation we just had, can you please create a ticket in our ticketing system and assign it, I don't know, for instance, in this case, to the networking team, so that they take action and move this forward. Important, really important, those security features that I mentioned. So we absolutely don't want that this could become a way to exfiltrate information. So you will have the ability to, or your administrators will have the ability to plug a queue onto their identity provider and to define the permissions that is, well, under which the different documents can be shared with the target employees. So through access control list, they will have the ability to define those rights. And Amazon Q will enforce them, of course, during the interactions. So there are a number of pre-built guardrails provided out of the box, but you also will have the ability to add your own. So, for instance, something that you can do is to specify whether or not the assistant is allowed to look for information within its own knowledge, within the data that was used to actually train the models that sit behind it, or not. So you can flag, and that's the checkbox that we see on top here, and enforce, like in this case, that the assistants will only use the knowledge bases that you made available to it to answer your questions. You also can define a number of words that you don't want it to use to answer you, but also to define some words that it should avoid if it's in the questions that you ask to answer those questions. And you define the way it behaves by specifying how it should react to such a question. Last but not least, you have the ability to control whether or not the end users can directly upload files to the interface. On top of that, you can also define its behavior regarding some specific topics. So not just blocking words, but defining topics that you want to restrict or guide its behavior. And you simply define it by providing some examples of what you expect to find in the messages from the end users that you want to control. And then you define its behavior. What do you want to do with it? Should you block it, or should you allow only certain users in the groups that you define at the bottom to use to be able to access certain topics? So, like in this example, I think that's a topic about security vulnerabilities, and you want to restrict it to particular users that have enough privileges to access that information. Connectors, so that's also a very important aspect. So a queue has pre-built connectors that allow you to directly plug multiple types of knowledge bases, but also external systems to actually take actions on your behalf, so that you don't have to build your own connectors before being able to interact with any of those 40 plus applications. But let's see it in an actual real setup. So for this demo, I will take you through an example where we provide, well, we'll see how it behaves first when we create the very first application to actually imagine that you're setting up an assistant, so you define what we call an application. That's simply that application that embodies the assistant that you want to make available to your employees. So within no time, you create it, you define what it is, you put a description, and then you have that empty shell that is your application. Now, what you need to do to be able to use it is, of course, plug some data onto it. So what you can do, for instance, is add a data source that consists of a website. So you just point Q to a public or a private website. That's for you to decide. You provide a URL. In this case, I don't need any authentication. I just point it to Q's documentation. I defined the depth until which I want to crawl that website, the number of links that I want to follow up on each page, the maximum number of documents that I want to index. And then I decide on which basis I want to synchronize if there are updates to that knowledge base. So for the sake of this example, I just put a manual synchronization. And so after a while, well, it just creates, that's relatively rapid, that data source, and then I need, of course, to go and sync it. It's gonna run for a while, depending on the size of the knowledge base that you're crawling and indexing, the number of documents, the size of the documents, etc. After a while, it completes that tasks, and it gives you a feedback, a summary of what it did. So in this case, it was able to index all documents but one, and I can go and look directly to find out what happens with that specific document. In this particular case, it takes me to CloudWatch with a specific crafted, already crafted query that lets me identify and pinpoint the exact problem that caused that issue. And then I can go and investigate further what was the issue. So now I've indexed my data source, and what I can do and go and start to play with it. So there is a preview. Think of it as a sandbox. So directly from the console, I can go and start interacting with the assistant that I've just created. So in this case, I can ask any question. So I indexed Amazon Q documentation, so I can ask it any question about Q, and it will normally give me an answer, but also provide details about where it actually found the answer. So that's citing the sources. So that's okay. And I can keep going, asking more questions, and okay, again, it will come back with the information that I requested and point me to where I can find more details about it. So that's okay, that's interesting. Now, okay, that's the first experimentation. What I want to do is carry on and bring on more of my own data, so share some enterprise data that can really be useful to my daily tasks. So for instance, as a solutions architect, it could be useful to leverage a corpus of data of best practices, general knowledge about AWS, for instance. So that's what we're going to do next, is actually add some data sources. First, a data source that contains some of the white papers published by AWS. So I just downloaded a bunch of white papers on Amazon S3. So I point that data source to that specific bucket. What I can do also is specify some advanced parameters. In particular, I can specify some SEL permissions to only let certain people access portions of my data source and not everything. But we'll see more about it in a moment. And I can also specify a prefix. For instance, well, the buckets may contain a number of things, and what I want to be indexed is also only a portion of it. Then again, I will run the synchronization on demand as I did the previous time. So again, same operation, syncing it, which will take some time before it gets done. Now, when it's complete, I again got the information about exactly what it did, and I can start querying the application, the assistant again. Before we do that, so let me just show you what was in there. So a number of subfolders with white papers, general practices, best practices coming from a number of things, information about white papers on databases, white papers on machine learnings, and we will use those to decide on which category of people, which group of people can actually access that data later on in the demo. So now, just if I just go and ask it to a couple of questions just to test it and see that it's actually correctly indexed the documents, I can start asking questions about, how to design solutions on AWS. So for instance, how to design a serverless application on AWS. And it will come up with some answer based on, hopefully, the documentation I shared with it. So in this case, it cites a number of sources, and it's pointing me to at least one of the documents that was found in the knowledge base. So that's good. So what I want to do next is to actually start playing around with the controls that Q provides me. So as a first try, what I'll do is define some words that I don't want Q to deal with. So anytime the assistant comes across a question about, in this case, football, I don't want it to answer because it's not its purpose. And so very, very basic, nothing fancy. So once I'm done, I can just go back and check it out directly in the sandbox interface to see that it's able to actually handle such questions. So asking anything about football, it should normally block it. That's the behavior I expect. All right, okay, so that's the expected behavior. So now I want to go a step further. So blocking words is not enough for me. What I want is to block some topics and have Q find out if there are some specific topics that I defined to avoid the entire conversation at all. So for instance, so in that case, I'm going to go and create a topic control. And what I want to avoid discussions about is to discuss anything that relates to the language models that were used to actually make the assistant work. It's my internal kitchen, and I don't want the end users to know anything about it. So in this case, I'm just gonna add a rule where I decide to block the topic altogether. I could decide to restrict it to some group of users, but in this case, I'm just going to block it for the sake of testing it. So now it should. So now if I go and again check it out, it should block all interactions asking questions about, okay, which data was used to actually train the models behind you, or which LLM were used, anything in that sense. So let's see. So if I ask a question about, okay, what data was used to train Q, okay. So it's blocking the conversation. If I ask something, if I try to be a little bit more subtle, so that's the exact question, if you recall, that I put in the topic control definition. So that's blocked, that's normal. Now if I ask a slightly different questions, but still coming back to the same topic, the assistant is clever enough to figure out, okay, it's related to that topic, I should block the conversation. Okay, so that's fine. Now we are able to control the topics and control the scope in which the assistant executes. Now what I want to do is also make sure that not all data is shared with everyone, but to respect the permissions that I've defined in my data source. So that's where I'm going to use that access control file. So that's the access control file that I passed on to the data source when I created it, if you recall. And it essentially contains the definitions of the permissions with the number of groups that I allow to access the different sections within my data source. So the best practices and the general sections can be accessed by all the groups, but the databases and the machine learning sections can only be accessed by the subject matter experts in those domains. So let's try it out. So the way I can try it is actually now I need to tie the assistant to my identity provider to get some identity information about the user that is connecting to the assistant, and derive from those credentials that I'm getting the permissions that are associated with that particular user. So how am I going to do that? I'm going to simply use an open source identity provider. We'll see that in a moment. So in this case, I'm just getting the information that I will need to feed the identity provider, and I plug in the descriptor from my identity provider that defines a trust for that SAML integration that I need to put together. I define also two attributes that I will use, email and groups, to define the permissions and decide whether or not the end users can access the documents that are in my knowledge base when they interact with the assistant. So now that this is set on the assistant side, on the identity provider side, I will also need to tie it to my assistant. And here I'm just going to show you the different groups that are being used. So I have one user for each of the groups. So I have one user for the admin groups. I have one SME for the database. John Doe is our machine learning expert. And I have Pat Candela, which is our solution architect. And now I'm going to be able to actually move on and use those permissions to validate the different accesses to my assistant. So to do that, I need to deploy the assistant. I can't directly use the sandbox in the console anymore. I need a proper deployment of my web experience application. So that's what I do. It just deploys a managed web frontend that is now integrated using that SAML integration with my identity provider. And now I just go and connect to the deployed application. So I'm going to first connect as an end user that is not part of any of the groups that I showed you. And you might recall, but in the access control list that I showed you earlier, some of the folders in my S3 buckets were not associated with any groups, which means that anyone can access those. And they were the general and the best practices documents in my knowledge base. So in this case, Mary, which just connects as a user that is not part of any of those groups, can only access those general and best practices documents. So when she asks a question about designing a serverless application on AWS, the sources used by the assistant should only come from those subfolders. And if you check, that's the general folders that I see here and over there. So okay, that's a good first step. So now what I want to do is try to see what happens if I use a different user that is part of one of those groups. So now I'm going to use first someone which is part of the SA group. So he has access to the general and best practices, but he also has access to all the well-architected framework documents that are part of my knowledge base. So in this case, it's going to ask exactly the same question, but hopefully Q now is going to be able to leverage the additional documents that are shared with that particular user. So in this case, because he has access also to the well-architected knowledge base inside my data source, Q is able to point and leverage that most useful document that sits in there. That's the well-architected lens of the well-architected framework. Okay, so that's a good thing. Now, DSA is just curious to start using some generative AI application and ask a question about specifically how to customize models on Amazon Bedrock. But in my knowledge base, I don't have anything. Well, I have the machine learning sections that is present, but my solution architect doesn't have access to it. It's only reserved to machine learning SMEs. So in this case, Q is unable to answer the document because the end user doesn't have access to that portion of my knowledge base. Now, if I log back on the assistant using this time the login of a machine learning SME, so this time someone who has access to that specific portion of my knowledge base, and if I ask the same question, I should get some more. I should get some answer, some proper answer to that question. So let's see what happens. Okay, so first asking the general question. So the SME also has access to the well-architected framework documentation, so it should get more or less the same answer that the SA got. Okay, so it's pointing again to the well-architected serverless lens. So that's good. Now let's ask the question on Bedrock, and hopefully now it's going to point me to the right portion of the documentation that the machine learning expert has access to. And indeed, it's pointing me to the folder that contains the data about machine learning. So that concludes our demo. As you can see, you have different ways to leverage documentation from multiple types of application, but also from multiple data sources and putting controls in place. So Q is really there to make sure that you get out of the box more precise, more accurate answers without having to deal with the complexity of putting together a retrieval augmented generation mechanism or fine-tuning a large language model. But out of the box, it's going to craft all the necessary components and building blocks together on your behalf. It's also going to cite its sources, so that's super important to build trust, so that you can clearly do some fact-checking on the output that you get out of it. Plus all the capabilities that you get directly out of the box, like plugging in external systems, having it to take some actions on your behalf, having a built-in web experience that you don't need to craft from scratch. Secondly, for you administrators out there, it's super important. They can be reassured that the assistant is not going to be used to actually leak information and will follow the permissions that they set and they define to access the different portion of your enterprise data. And they also have the ability to actually scope the behavior of the assistant by defining specific guardrails, doing some enforcing topic control as we've seen it. And last but not least, because of the pre-built filters that Q provides, that's an enormous gain of time. So from the moment you have the idea of providing an assistant to your employees to the moment you actually set it in production, that time is really shortened and accelerated. So it comes with a number of features. We've seen the connectors. It has, of course, behind the scene a vector database so that it can index all the documents that you pass it. And it's integrating, it has the ability to integrate with your identity provider out of the box. So coming back to our original examples, so now my marketing manager was looking to launch a campaign about a new product. Well, he can use the assistance to actually investigate the information that is available out there, define, okay, what is the best way to actually craft the campaign? What are the best sources, the best channel to select for that particular campaign? How should I craft the actual product definition? How should I market it? Likewise, my sales manager now it's able not only to prepare for that meeting, sift through all the informations that were out there in emails threads, in my CRM system, in the various documentation, the account strategy, but also during the meeting, if there is information that I need to provide back to the customer, then I'm able directly to interrogate the assistant and provide information back in real time. Likewise, for all the other types of employees, whether I'm a developer again, someone from the administration, a research scientist, an engineer, everything can, all that Q can bring to those different professions can accelerate and augment their productivity tremendously. So, well, I really encourage you to get started, and that's really easy, exactly as the demo I showed you. Just, log on to the console, check out on the user guide of Q. Really simple to get going, just try it out. Obviously, the public website is there to provide more information and more details about what you can do about it. Don't forget to consult also skillbuilder.aws. There's a ton of trainings, free trainings available, about 600 hours of free trainings available. And you can, of course, build up your skill, look up to become certified on different domains inside on AWS. Well, with that, I want to thank you for coming to this session. I hope you enjoyed it. And don't forget, please, to rate it. That's super important for us. And I wish you a good rest of the day, and see you soon.